You should be here for ArcGIS Enterprise managing ArcGIS Server. So thank you guys for showing up. I hope you guys had a good lunch. Welcome to day 2 of the user conference, right? Lots of cool and exciting stuff. Yes? No? Still digesting, right? I love how I get these prime slots, either like first thing in the morning, or Friday first thing in the morning, or like right after lunch. Everyone's all kind of mellow and digesting. How many of you are attending user conference for the first time? Oh, a few of you. Well, welcome. That's cool. This is my 3rd week at Esri. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. So, well, welcome to the Esri conference. I hope you have a great time. For those of you who are new, I strongly encourage you to enjoy the week. You know, it is a fire hose of information. You will get a lot of content. But for those of you who are new, I want to highlight to you that if you plan your week strategically, you can have every evening meal comped, right, and save on that per diem. So as I was saying earlier, last night we had the map gallery opening, which was fantastic. I heard there were oysters. I saw on Twitter. I didn't, right? The Taylor Shop selling oysters. Anybody have any? Was it good? Nice. Oh, yeah? And the geoduck. Oh, we ate the geoduck. Interesting. Okay. And so tonight and tomorrow night, there are socials. So as I was saying earlier, if you go to the online agenda, just search for social under sessions and you'll find something. And I was telling some folks earlier, even if you are not in the industry, just go to the oil and gas event or utility sector because they're not going to refuse you. You have the badge, right? Don't tell them I sent you, but go and have a good time, right? Same thing with tomorrow night. Thursday night is our big party at Balboa Park. If you are attending for the first time, you should be aware that the party's not here. It's in Balboa Park, so you have to take a bus there. And what you need to do is get a wristband. It's one of those ones that they tie on permanently. And many people don't know this, so they wait till Thursday afternoon to get the wristband. Bad move because there's lineups. So you could get it now, but then you have to wear it for 3 days while you're in the shower and stuff. So do it Thursday morning, right? Thursday morning, info desk, 9 a.m. It's pretty dead. Go get a wristband. Okay? So that's useful. Yeah, so definitely go to those events. Yeah, and I'm still on for time here. So, yes. So, if you've seen me present a tech session, I'm nervous. You know, it's an intimidating crowd here, and so I always tell jokes, right, to kind of make sure everyone's all in a good mood. You've had lunch. We're all digesting. You know. So yes, I do have a couple of jokes. If you saw any of my sessions earlier, I do have different jokes, but I have like 9 slots, so I get spread a little thin. They are different from the other sessions, but if you go to a repeat session, I will have the same jokes. Does that make sense? So, yes. So, let's see, anything else? Oh, if you have questions, if you have technical questions, you want to go to the expo, which is down on the ground floor, right? Be aware that the expo closes on Thursday around 1 o'clock, I believe. So I know someone in your office gave you a list of questions to ask. You're having a lot of fun here, hitting those socials. You don't want to get stuck on Thursday with that list of questions unanswered. So you want to make sure you go to the expo before 1:30 on Thursday. All right? So you should be here for managing ArcGIS Enterprise, managing ArcGIS Server. Now, before I begin, as I said, I like to tell a couple of jokes always, to make sure we're all in a good mood and relaxed. So this is Amazon. I did not know it was Amazon Prime Day. I'm going to miss all the deals. Not that I'm endorsing that vendor in any way, shape, or form. I am also not endorsing any alcohol at the socials in any way, shape, or form. But there's this, great series of books published by O'Reilly, right? If you want to learn some new technology. And as an example, I pulled up this one called Programming JavaScript Applications. If you've anyone used these books, they're fantastic. They're, really useful. They have, good kind of hold your hand steps and guides written by industry experts. And there's a new series of books that's going to be released this summer. So I wanted to share some of them with you because I'm excited. I'm kind of a geo geek, and I got a preview, or I went to this website that had a preview of some of their new editions. So I thought I'd share that with you. Are we all good? Okay. So you should be here for ArcGIS Enterprise, managing ArcGIS Server. There are some seats up here if you want to come up. So again, keeping in mind new preview series of books by O'Reilly, I think you will find useful coming this summer. Okay? Now, the titles, they decided to take a different approach and have more casual, laid-back titles to increase readership and sound less intimidating. So far, so good? You know, for example, there's this one here called Trying Stuff Out Until It Works. You know, when you, on that rare occasion when there's something that doesn't quite go right. There's another one here which I actually personally do all the time. I'm sure you guys do as well. I'm expecting this to be a thinner book and not quite a thick one. But this one is basically Googling the error message till you find the issue, right? Another one here. This one also I find particularly useful. I work with beta software all the time. Love Esri, love the development team, but there's always some snafu. And in my role, I kind of have to work across applications, but they always say, hey, Derek, try this. Right? Temporary workarounds. It's always going to fit it out. Another addition here. This one is more targeted for those of you, analysts, developers, and you have that senior management, no offense to senior management here, who are very demanding, or they change their requirements for an app they want to deploy. All right, so they say, oh, you know what, that looks great, but we got to change it. Okay, we have some new requirement. All right, next edition here. This one is also very useful, I find. Although lately I found it hasn't been as useful, but another very useful title is this. Copying and pasting from Stack Overflow, right? And finally, I know that I have a lot of friends who work in development. I expect this will be their personal favorite. They're probably all going to buy this as soon as it gets released. All right? Here we go. Because, it's always user error. All right? Okay. I have 128, and I've stalled quite a bit, but thank you guys for coming. You should be here for ArcGIS Enterprise Managing ArcGIS Server. I will give you a fair warning. I kind of think of this as an intermediate level course. So if you are brand new to GIS and have never used ArcGIS Enterprise and want to learn about it, fantastic, welcome. This may not be the session for you, all right? My understanding is, I believe it's right next door or across the hall, there's an introduction to ArcGIS Enterprise. That may be more suited for you. And there's no embarrassment if you want to step out and leave, it's all good. I just want to set the expectation that we'll touch on some stuff, but then it's kind of like a intermediate deep dive into basically administering your ArcGIS server instance. All right, so I want to set that expectation. My name is Derek Law, and I work on the, in a previous life, I used to do ArcGIS server and Portal for ArcGIS 24/7, but now I'm on the apps product management team. So, don't worry. I understand server. I know how it works. And I'm going to take you on a tour of ArcGIS Server Manager. Okay? So what are we going to cover over the next hour? This is an action-packed session. There's lots of content in here. I don't want anyone to be intimidated or stressed out. If you need a copy of the PowerPoint, you will get it in the proceedings DVD, probably in like a month. If you need it sooner, just email me, and I will send it to you probably Tuesday. All right? It's not hard to figure out the Esri secret code email address. It's the first initial last name at esri.com. Or I'll give you my card at the end of the session. Fair enough? So I don't want anyone to stress. People learn differently, and I know that I kind of listen and watch. So don't worry about taking copious notes. What are we going to cover in this session? Okay? Lots of different content. We'll talk about the ArcGIS server usage patterns. I want you guys to leave here and understand the ArcGIS server component. What are its pieces? We'll talk about the ArcGIS Web Adapter component, and we'll talk about installing both and how and when you would install both pieces. We'll also talk about single and multi-machine deployments of ArcGIS server. There are seats up in front if you guys want to come into the door. There are seats, just kind of have to loop in there. They miss the jokes, see the quality jokes. We'll then talk about ArcGIS server in more detail. So I'm going to give you a tour. I'm literally going to go through, open up the app, and show you different pieces that you should be aware of as an ArcGIS server administrator. While I am doing that, I will explain the idea or the concept of the data store in parentheses. And how is that different from the ArcGIS data store? They sound the same, and I apologize, but they mean different things. And I want to make sure you guys understand clearly what that means. I'll then talk about the ArcGIS Server Administrator Directory, go over some best practices in terms of security, what you can and can't do. And then I'll talk about the ArcGIS Server command line utilities, and again, highlight some of its benefits. And at the very end, we'll talk about upgrading an ArcGIS Server site. So we do have an absolutely full session, all right? We have a second offering. I think it's on Thursday. But yeah, so hopefully you guys had a good lunch. We're all wide awake. We have our coffee, and we're raring to go, right? Let's start from the very beginning, right? What is ArcGIS Enterprise? As you may or may not be aware, at the 10.5 release, we renamed what we used to call ArcGIS 4 Server into ArcGIS Enterprise. This is an umbrella term that basically means you can install the ArcGIS WebGIS pattern within your own infrastructure. So when you buy ArcGIS Enterprise, you get these 4 pieces: the ArcGIS Web Adapter, Portal for ArcGIS, ArcGIS Server, and the ArcGIS Data Store. And these 4 pieces work together to allow you to deploy that WebGIS pattern in your own infrastructure. Think of it like having your own ArcGIS online, either running on your own machines or running in the private cloud. Now, for the purposes of this technical session, because we have lots of content, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to spend a big chunk of my time talking about ArcGIS Server. And you guys, as the well-paid ArcGIS Server administrators, will learn everything you need to know and do a deep dive into this component. While we are doing that, I will also touch on the ArcGIS Web Adapter and the ArcGIS Data Store. So it's pretty good. You'll have 75% of these components covered. I'm presenting the Portal for ArcGIS Tech session tomorrow morning at 10:30. Not sure where, but somewhere in this building. Okay. So let's take a look. Right? How is ArcGIS Server used? The component. Well, we have this classic pattern of server GIS. In other words, all I do is I install ArcGIS Server. It is the software that allows me to take my local data and I can share it as a web service. I do so I can increase the audience of people who can use, access, and work with my GIS data. This is a classic pattern that Esri has promoted for many, many years. It's very successful. You and your organization, you might have an ArcGIS Server installation running, and your boss is like, fantastic, this is all we need, I don't need Portal. Hopefully I will convince you that you do, if you come to the Portal session tomorrow. But Esri's moving forward, right? We're advancing our technology, and a new pattern that has emerged is this idea of WebGIS. Now the role of ArcGIS Server has changed. It's not a standalone machine serving out your web services. It works with the other 3 components to deploy WebGIS, to give you the ArcGIS Online-like user experience within your own infrastructure. Okay, and we'll go over some reasons why in a minute. So this is pretty powerful. Now ArcGIS Server, the component, which is the icon in the middle, in the lower right-hand corner, works with Portal for ArcGIS, and it works with the ArcGIS Data Store to give you that ArcGIS Online experience. So far, so good? Okay, let me know if people have questions. I will do my best to address them, and if not, we can take it offline. So let's look at ArcGIS Server, because that's the title of the session. This is the ArcGIS Server component. What is it? Easy installation and configuration, designed to work with your enterprise systems, right? It is the software component that allows you to take your local data, your shapefiles, your feature classes, your models, your locators for geocoding, and you can share them as web services to allow web clients, mobile clients, and other desktop clients to access that functionality. Now you can install it on your own physical machine, or you can actually install it in the cloud, in your own private cloud if you want. And we have special tooling to make it easier for you to install ArcGIS Server in the Amazon cloud or Microsoft Azure. And I know there's a tech session on both deployment patterns if you want to go to them. The key thing to be aware of here is ArcGIS Server has been designed to work with the other 3 components of ArcGIS Enterprise, all highlighted in yellow. They work together to deploy this WebGIS pattern and you can install ArcGIS Server on Windows or Linux. Now, the first obvious question is, okay, how do I go about installing it, right? You can install ArcGIS Server by itself. And here's a screen capture of the simple setup.exe. When you're installing the software, you go through this wizard. It's going to ask you, please create an account called ArcGIS. This is an operating system level account. It could be a local account on your machine, or it could be a domain account, right? This account is what the software uses under the covers to talk to Portal, to talk to the data stores, to talk to the other pieces. So this is important. Then you create a server site. I'm going to explain what that is in a minute. And it's going to ask you to create an administrator account for the server site. So we have two ideas here. One is a login at the operating system level called ArcGIS. The second is a login for the server site that you will use to administer your account. Sorry, your server site. And then you have the option to install the ArcGIS web adapter. And I'm going to explain why a few slides from now, why it's optional. So far, so good? So lots of screenshots, Derek. Let's talk about concepts. Let's say I've gone through the installation. What do I get with ArcGIS Server? On the slide here, you see this green box. This represents the software. It's on my machine. It's running ArcGIS Server. It's the software that allows me to take my local data and I can share it as web services. It's listening for requests on two different ports, 6080 and 6443. 6443 is for secured services. Remember what I said, when I'm going through the wizard and I install ArcGIS Server, I create a new operating system level account called ArcGIS. This could be a local account or a domain account. This is the account that the software uses behind the scenes to talk to the other components and to execute its operations. In addition to that, so I have ArcGIS Server running. How do I, as an end user or administrator, work with ArcGIS Server? Well, I actually have three different ways, three different endpoints. I have ArcGIS Server Manager, which I'm going to explain in a minute. It's the web-based administrative console. I have the Server Administration API, which is another console for me to execute commands. And I also have the service directories. It's basically a web page that lists all the different web services that are available in ArcGIS Server. Now, I mentioned I create two accounts, right? I create the ArcGIS account. I also create what's called the Primary Site Administrator account, or the PSA account. This is the account that I use to log in to my ArcGIS Server site. So the ArcGIS account is my high-level operating system account used by the software. The PSA account is the one that I use to log into ArcGIS Server. So far, so good? Hopefully we're doing okay. I know it's only day 2, folks, right? We're hanging there. Also, what gets installed are these two directories, the configuration store and the server directories. Those two yellow boxes are the lifeblood of your server site. If anything in those two yellow boxes gets corrupted, then you're in trouble. But we've backed it up, right? We want to make sure we do that. Okay, so that's really key. The configuration store stores all my configurations for my server site, and the server directories stores more information about my services. I can optionally install an enterprise geodatabase or an SDE geodatabase if I want to, as a data source for my ArcGIS server site. So far, so good. All of this is what we call a server site. All of these pieces. So after you've installed just the ArcGIS server components, this would be the ArcGIS server site. Now, I went over a bunch of ideas really quickly, so I want to make sure we recap some key concepts. All right? We have ArcGIS. Let's look at these 3 yellow boxes in a bit more detail. Okay? So after I've installed ArcGIS Server, how can I interact with it as the admin? Well, I can use ArcGIS Server Manager. It's a web application that runs in a web browser. It allows me to connect with my server site. I log in with my PSA, my Primary Site Administrator account, and I can view information like how many services do I have? Do I want to change their properties? What security settings do I have? Logging for that rare occasion when something goes wrong. That was a joke, right? Okay. I also have the server administrator directory. This is another view into my server site. You don't really want to run commands in this administrator directory. This is more designed to give you a view of the server site, and it teaches you the URL links so you can write scripts if you want to automate tasks. We'll talk about this section a little later on. Finally, the third endpoint is your services directory, right? So on the left, you see my server site. We communicate with our web services through the REST protocol. And basically, this web page is stood up, and every single hyperlink on this web page represents a web service, represents a layer of data that I am sharing as a web service. If I were to click on one of them, I could get more detailed information about that web service, and I can actually view that web service if I wanted to. Okay, so I have that possibility as well. And just to stop and take a quick tour, I want to make sure that, we have this academic theory. Let's look at the software, right? So here I have my web browser opened up. I have ArcGIS Server Manager. You can see here I can view all my web services, right? I also have my services directory, and I log in with my ArcGIS account, right? Who says yes? Who says no? I log in with my PSA. Thank you. We're all paying attention. Fantastic. This is my admin account to my server site, and here I can view more information about my server site. And finally, I have the services directory. This is an open web page, lists all my web services that are available. I can go in, if you watch, Server Manager, I have 3 folders: demo data, Naperville, right? 4 folders, sorry. Here in my services directory, demo data, Naperville, and utilities. Now this one, I'll talk about a little bit. These are built-in services. You don't want to mess with them, but let's go into Naperville. And I have, let's say, 5 web services. Well, I go to my services directory, Naperville, 5 web services. Same thing. I can click on hydrology. I get more information about that web service, or I can actually view it in a little viewer here. Ooh, yes, I know admin demos are not that sexy. Okay, let's move on. Let's recap some of those key takeaways when I'm installing my server site. I mentioned previously, and I'll say it again, when you install ArcGIS Server, you create 2 accounts. One is the ArcGIS account. It's an operating system level account. Could be local or domain. This is what ArcGIS Server uses behind the scenes to talk to other components. We also have that PSA, that primary site administrator account. This is the one that you use to log in to ArcGIS Server Manager or the Server Administrator API if you want to execute some commands. I also mentioned those 2 yellow folders. Really, really important, right? The configuration store and the server directories. These store additional attributes, configuration settings about your web services and server site. Note the text in orange. You want to make sure this is on some really protected location or file share or a location that is backed up regularly. If either of these locations gets compromised, then your site's in trouble. And because we're all good admins, we're going to roll back to the previous backup, right? We all should be nodding yes. Yes, this is what we want to do. Okay. I also mentioned when you install your server site, we have a couple of ports, right? So a port, think of it like a door, right? This is that communication endpoint used by ArcGIS Server. And when we do a default server installation, we use 2 ports by default. 6080 is the unsecured port, HTTP. 6443 is the secured port that we communicate through HTTPS. We should all be using 6443 as a best practice. Okay? You don't want to lose data. You don't want to have it compromised. And by default, since I believe 10.4.1, we basically set up HTTPS on your server site. You used to have a choice. Now we're saying, because we love you, we're making it secure. It might be painful. You might have to have a security certificate, but it's because we care, and we want your data to be secure. So far, so good? We doing okay? All right. We've talked about the server site. let's look at the ArcGIS web adapter component. And before you even look at the text, look at the diagram at the bottom right-hand corner. That green square now represents all the different pieces that I described earlier as your ArcGIS server site. Now, chances are when you install the ArcGIS server component on your machine, it'll be running there. Chances are within your organization, you probably have a web server, some third-party web server that your company uses to share content, either internally or externally or both. Could be like IIS, could be Oracle WebSphere, or Apache, something else, right? So if you want to have your server site work with that third-party web server, you can use the ArcGIS web adapter component. That's its purpose in life. The ArcGIS web adapter component basically enables communication and allows your server site to work with a third-party web server. Think of it conceptually like a reverse proxy. This is what's going on here. Okay. That's why the web adapter is optional. I don't have to have the web adapter if I don't want to, but it's recommended as a best practice for security. You also need to install the web adapter if you want to enable web tier authentication. Because there's two different types of security authentication, GIS tier and web tier. I'm going to touch on them a few slides from now, but I encourage you to go to the Introduction to Security session for ArcGIS Enterprise to learn more. The ArcGIS web adapter is a separate software installation, so you install ArcGIS server first, and then you install the web adapter in the web server. And in actual fact, again, let me show you. I can go to my machine. I'll type in IIS Manager. So I'm running Windows 10. By default, Windows 10 includes IIS Manager, which is a web server. And if I open it up, I can expand it. Here's my default website. I actually have two web adapters installed, one for portal, one for server. It's a little piece of software that installs in your web adapter. Sorry, that installs in your web server. I apologize. Okay. This is great, Derek. How is it useful? Well, here's an example. Right? Let's say we have this configuration. We have the ArcGIS server site running. We know we have the configuration store and server directories on some file share that's backed up, right? We have a recovery plan. We're protecting it. We have our third-party web server. We have the web adapter installed. Here's a very common workflow. What if I have a firewall in between my web server and my server site because of security? Especially in this day and age when you hear about all those companies being hacked, right? So if I do this setup, I could have my client requests connect to the URL of my server site through the web adapter, and then the web adapter will redirect that request to my server site. Whereas myself or my trusted set of colleagues could make administration connections directly to the server site through port 6443. This is one example. Okay, there's a whole other tech session on deployment patterns, which I have a link to that I'm going to show you in a minute. But this is one example of where it might be useful. So far, so good? Now, another common question that comes up is, well, what if I have heavy payload? What if I know I'm going to serve like 100 web services or 1,000? I have a big organization. Right? You have to ask yourself, well, is one machine going to cut it? Probably not. I may need to have a multi-machine deployment. So in the diagram here on the left, yes, I have one machine running a server site, 4-core machine, and I'm serving out my data. But what if, for example, your web services become super hot, you want to deploy more web services, what can I do? Well, what I could do is this. I could have another server machine, another, and a third. And I could have multiple machines with the ArcGIS server component installed, all working together. We call this a server site, all collected together. So far, so good? So if we move on with this idea, I could have this type of multi-machine deployment. Notice now, 3 different physical machines, or VMs. They are all talking to each other because they all form or comprise the same server site. They're all referencing the same server directories and configuration store on that backed up and protected file share. I can't emphasize that enough. And then I have my web server with my web adapter. My web adapter not only serves as a reverse proxy, but it's kind of like a load balancer for requests between my different machines that participate in my server site. So far, so good. Are we having fun? Yes. All right. So we talked about the server GIS usage. Everything I've talked about thus far is the ArcGIS server component, typically used as a standalone server site to share out your data. And there's nothing wrong with that. People still do that today. Many organizations have done that. But lately, I'm sure you heard Jack yesterday morning, the future of the ArcGIS platform is this idea of WebGIS. Taking your server site and hooking it up to a portal for ArcGIS instance. You get it. It's no extra charge. When you buy ArcGIS Enterprise, you get ArcGIS Server, you get Portal for ArcGIS. And we want you to deploy the WebGIS pattern. It's this entire stack of Portal for ArcGIS, the server site, and then the ArcGIS data store. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more today and also in tomorrow's Portal for ArcGIS session if you decide to go. By doing this, you then get the full capabilities of WebGIS, such as access to all the client applications, such as smart mapping in the map viewer, such as the ability to create apps without coding using Web App Builder and the configurable templates, and a lot more other cool stuff. Now, if I want to deploy the WebGIS pattern, yesterday they showed during the plenary this ArcGIS Enterprise Builder, right? This is awesome. I do like it. I just feel like it was a little bit overhyped, and let me tell you why. Okay? We have this wizard. It will deploy all of those 5 components for you in this wizard under an hour, like as advertised, on one machine. I have that on my machine now. But my machine is a demo machine. If I'm going to go into production and I know I have like 100 users or 1,000 services, this may not be the solution for you. That's why we're having so much fun talking about the nitty-gritty of configuring server and portal, right? So I'm just setting expectations. This works. It's a good first step. It installs everything on one machine. So I want you to be aware of that. All right? Now, something else to be aware of is you'll notice that ArcGIS Server, the ArcGIS Server component, can actually be licensed for different roles. So up until now, when I talked about ArcGIS Server and the server site and the green box and all those different pieces, I was talking about the diagram on the left. It is a typical ArcGIS Server site. And if I use the regular license, I get what's called the GIS Server role, which is the diagram second to the right. It's the classic use case of taking your data, serving them out as web services. Fantastic. Life is good. And it can be used to serve out geoprocessing services, some image services. But if you have a medium to large organization and you know that you're going to serve out a whole ton of imagery, or you know that you want to consume real-time data feeds with GeoEvent, or you know that you're like UPS and you want to have thousands of records per second, so in other words, a big data problem, you might use GeoAnalytics Server, or you might use Business Analyst Server, then you can still follow the same content that I showed you to install Server, but then you would license it for one of those 4 other uses, right? This machine, this server site is just going to do heavy image server loading. Or this machine is just going to consume real-time data feeds from the GeoEvent extension. Does that make sense? So it depends. So if you're a medium to large organization, you know you have a lot of stuff you want to process, you may have to add additional machines. That's all I'm saying. Yes?
So previously, we could install GeoEvent image server as extensions on the same ArcGIS server site. Now, if I understand correctly, in order to enable those other roles, we would need to roll them out on a
That is correct. Let me repeat the gentleman's question. He said previously, I would get ArcGIS Server, I would get the extension, and I would install it on the same box. That is correct. Now we're saying you get ArcGIS Server, you get the image analyst extension, and we're telling you to install it on a separate box. We are saying that as a best practice. Because what we found is in the past, when you throw everything on the same box, what's going to happen? Performance hit. So again, because we care about you guys, we're just saying, you know what, forget it. You need a separate box. We don't want to have more tech support calls. We want to promote this idea of having multiple VMs or multiple machines. Does that make sense, sir?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Sure. The question was, what about ArcSDE? That term is taboo. For those of you who have been with Esri for many years, ArcSDE was Spatial Data Engine. It's the little bit of technology that allowed you to install in a database to make it a geodatabase, right? So you can store spatial data. You do get ArcSDE technology inside ArcGIS Server. If it was me, I would not put it on the same machine as a GIS Server box, although you could. Typically, that would be a separate machine, which is a dedicated database machine with Oracle, SQL Server, or what have you, that the GIS Server connects to.
Is it its own server side, that other machine that's SQL Server?
Sure. So the question is ArcSDE, are ArcSDE or Enterprise Geodatabases their own server site? No. They are basically a separate database. And like any other database, you could put it on one of these boxes, but I would put it on its own dedicated machine. The term ArcSDE kind of got deprecated. Now, when you want to find it, it's called Enterprise Geodatabase. So the question is, what about licensing? Yes, you still have to pay extra for image server and GeoEvent and GeoAnalytics, and that's what I can answer. I can't give numbers, but previously they were also extensions which required additional licensing. So that hasn't changed. It's just a system requirement. Again, as a best practice, we're telling you put it on a separate box. Yes, sir.
So essentially, if you want to use an image server, you're essentially going to install ArcGIS Server and enable it to be its role to be an image server.
That is correct. Let me repeat the gentleman's question. Yes. So what if I wanted to have ArcGIS Server and I know I wanted to use image server? Then I would get 2 licenses, install ArcGIS Server Basic, or I guess the normal, in one box, and then the image server extension on another box. Yes. Okay. So far, so good? All right. Yes, sir.
If we are installing the instances of ArcGIS Server with the different roles, do we need to make sure that they have a shared configuration store with the base GIS server in?
Sure. So the question was this. What if I'm installing ArcGIS Server, like normal, an image server? Do they have to have the same access to the configuration store and server directories? The answer is no, because they're separate server sites. So my GIS server would have its own 2 yellow boxes. My image server would have its separate own 2 yellow boxes. We've partitioned it that way, again, to optimize performance.
So it's not correct to say that a GIS server, an image server, and a GeoEvent server would participate in a site. They would be separate ArcGIS server sites. It's conceivable they might participate in a portal down the line, but they're separate sites unto themselves.
That is correct. Let me just repeat what he said. So on the slide here, I have 5 icons of ArcGIS Server in different roles. Each one of those icons represents a unique site, a unique green box in my previous slides. Does that make sense? They do not get aggregated together into one single site. That is not correct. However, they can all be linked to one portal for ArcGIS instance. And if you want to talk more, we can definitely talk more. Remember, there's actually, next slide, good segue, there's a whole session on architecting your deployment, because they only have an hour. Right? But here's where you go. If you want to learn about the ArcGIS Web Adapter, there's a demo theater. If you are new and want to learn about installing the entire ArcGIS Enterprise stack, we'll go to the Building Your First Deployment demo theater. And finally, for architecting your deployment, that goes into more theory on how you can deploy your sites. Really depends on your business requirements, your needs, the level of traffic, activity, etc. Okay? There's no one best fit answer, unfortunately. This is the wonder and magic of ArcGIS Enterprise. It's a good thing, bad thing. Okay? All right. Let's move on now and look at ArcGIS Server Manager in more detail. I mentioned earlier this is that web browser-based admin console for your ArcGIS server site. And we're going to cover these topics. We'll talk about the pre-installed web services. We'll talk about the data store concept versus the ArcGIS data store component. I want to make sure everyone leaves here understanding the difference. We'll talk about security, service usage statistics, and server logging. Now, in ArcGIS Server Manager, by default, after you've installed the site, it comes with 18 web services pre-installed. Some of them are running, some of them are not. Read the text in orange, don't mess with this, right? You would mess with it by adding more resources, so more instances, but you wouldn't want to change anything else. These are designed to basically help you have a good, healthy server site and to do operations. We've also included a web service called Sample World Cities, and it's there as a sample. So you click on it and you feel good. Yes, my ArcGIS server site is working properly. That's all. That's its only purpose in life. You can blow it away later. I've gone to customer sites where they still have it running, and I'm like, dude, that's consuming resources. Okay. Now let me highlight some of the ones that are useful. We have this publishing tools geoprocessing service, which allows you to publish service definition files from ArcGIS Server Manager. Caching allows you to build cache map services. Printing supports custom print services, if you want, in your web apps and also in Portal. And then we have the spatial analysis tools, right, which allows you to have some spatial analysis functionality in the Portal map viewer if you've deployed the WebGIS. So if you've taken the server site and configured it with the other components of ArcGIS Enterprise, so ArcGIS Data Store and Portal for ArcGIS. You can also click on those web services and view some simple properties, right? So let's just take a quick look at what I mean. So I'm going to go back to ArcGIS Server Manager. I log in with my PSA account, and you can see we have our Services tab, and I have my different web services. As I mentioned, we have this System folder, which contains some GP services that you may use. Notice some of them are stopped, right? So Distributed Worker or GeoAnalytics. I don't have GeoAnalytics server talking to this server site. Therefore, it's stopped. Does that make sense? Right? If I want to do the big data processing. Remember, I only have a simple demo machine, and you're welcome to say, Derek needs a better machine on my survey. That was a joke, and nobody laughed. I also have these utility services. These are ones that are running, right? If I want to do geocoding, printing, search. Now, if I go to my web services, I can click on one, let's say, for example, streets, and I can view some of its properties, right? What are the different parameters? Where is the data being stored in my server directories? What capabilities have I enabled? Do I want to support some OGC standards or enable feature access, which I don't have turned on? Okay. Pooling, this is important. This is important. How many instances do I want to assign? So if I know my streets web service is getting hit all the time and used a lot, I would bump up the number of instances, the number of resources that the service can consume to process those requests. The maximum number of instances, I have no idea, depends on your machine. Okay? There's a whole other section on scaling and optimizing your services that I don't cover. But I will say this. Remember how I said let me go back up here. Remember how I said don't mess with your utility services? Right, these ones here? If I know I'm doing a lot of caching, maybe I might want to click on this, and the only property I would change is the number of instances. Does that make sense? I wouldn't want to mess with any of the other properties. And then, of course, after you've installed your site, you probably want to delete or blow away Sample World Cities. Right? Yes? Sorry, you said if I have my machine... Okay, so the question was, if I have 4 machines clustered together, can I bump up the number of instances? That's kind of a loaded question, and here's why. If you're asking, let's say I have a server site with 4 machines. I don't want to use the word cluster, but 4 machines. And I bump up the number of instances to 6. That'll consume 6 on every single machine in my single server site. Okay? As an FYI, in the old ArcGIS server documentation, we used to tell customers they could cluster machines. What does that mean? I would have these 2 machines form a group, and these 2 machines form a group. All of them would form one server site. We don't promote that now as a best practice because we found that's a performance hit. That's why I chose not to use the word cluster. So if I have a multi-machine deployment, 1, 2, 3, 4, as a single server site forming one single box, yes, I could assign instances to a web service that'll allocate them to every single machine participating in my multi-machine site. Okay. All right. Let's keep going here. Now, I'm going to change tactics now, or change and talk about data stores. Okay, this term is kind of loaded, so I want to make sure we're all clear on data stores. So there's 2 terms. There's one is the ArcGIS server data store concept. This is an idea. That's why I have it in parentheses. Basically, an ArcGIS data store, the idea, is a valid location that ArcGIS server can see that stores data that powers my web services. Let me repeat that. So let's say I have a database or a folder. It contains data. And this data will power my web services. It's a location that the server site can see. It typically has read-write access. It accesses this location with the ArcGIS account, and it uses it to power web services. Is everyone okay with that? This data store concept has been around since the 10.1 release. When we first released ArcGIS Server 10.0, I would say a third of our support calls was caused by the fact that ArcGIS Server did not have permission to access that resource to share it as a web service. This is why at 10.1 we introduced this idea of a data store, a valid location that ArcGIS Server has read-write access to. The location typically contains data that powers my web services. So far, so good? Yes, right? This is a separate idea from the ArcGIS data store component. Yes, I've already been criticized about the naming. Can't help you there. That ship has sailed. The ArcGIS data store, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. The ArcGIS data store component is something separate. It's a separate software installation. It installs a new piece of software that talks to your server site. It is used as part of a web GIS deployment. And I'm going to explain both. We're going to go through some demos, so don't worry. We're going to focus on the data store concept first. Okay? Now, so we have this data store concept, and before, so what did I say? I said it was a location that stored data that powered my web services. So as a review, and I don't mean to be patronizing, I want to make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to quickly review how to publish content. Who here has not or has published content? Okay, so many of you, right? You know that you can use ArcMap, take your map, and you can publish it to ArcGIS Server. No problem. Life is good. You should also know that ArcGIS Pro is different. ArcGIS Pro is the premier client to a web GIS. It does not publish directly to ArcGIS Server. It publishes to a portal, which is linked to ArcGIS Server, or it publishes to ArcGIS Online. This is by design because ArcGIS Portal leverages a lot of cool stuff in Portal, the geoinformation model. I'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay. ArcMap can publish to a portal as an FYI if you want to. So how do I publish content, right? I'm in ArcMap, I author my map. If I want to publish content, I go to Share as a Service, right? So I see that dialog window. I then see the service editor dialog, and I specify a whole bunch of different properties about that service. And then because we care, the software has like a publish and an analyze button. And even though you think you're being smart and saying, I'm not going to analyze it, publish, we analyze anyways, because we care. Okay? That button is there to make you have this placebo effect that you're beating the system. You're not. Okay? So we analyze, and we check the data to make sure, hey, have you optimized everything so it's going to work on the web really, really well? And you have a choice to either make a new GIS service or a service definition file. This is just a review of publishing. So again, the data store concept is this idea of a valid location stores data that powers my web services. And my ArcGIS account that we made in the install should have read-write access to this folder. With me so far? Could be a folder, could be a database. I can define a data store either in ArcGIS Server Manager or in ArcMap, and I'm going to show you both. So far, so good? Let's go through some examples, Derek. Okay, let's take a look. First, I could copy the data. So what does that mean? I have ArcMap. It's looking at some data. I publish the web service. What happens behind the scenes? The data is copied from the machine that ArcMap was referencing to it to the ArcGIS server site. And the web service then consumes the data that's copied. Okay, this is what happens by default. So this is the default operation. Now this is good and bad, right? The default option is, yes, it's a nice user experience. The person publishing, he or she, feels good. They publish their web service. They don't have to worry. They don't have any problems. But what happens here is I copy data to the server box, right? So what if myself and these two gentlemen were all viewing the same data and we all published with copy? What's going to happen? We have 3 copies of the same data on my server box. Is that good or bad? Probably bad, right? But let's just take a look. So again, just to prove to you, no smoke and mirrors, this is Server Manager. I only have one service running. Okay. I'm now going to go to ArcMap. And you're looking at some lovely geology data off an island in Spain. Never been. And now here, you can see my data is at C UC Demo Source 1 Geology Island. You guys see that, right? And just to make sure there's no smoke and mirrors, I'm being totally honest, Windows Explorer, C UC Demo Source 1 Geology Island. You see that? There's a file geodatabase here. Okay? So I want to publish this to ArcGIS Server. So I go to File, Share As, a service, publish a service, hit Next. I connect to my server site, and I'll call this Spain Geology Copy. Hit Next. I'm going to put it in the root folder, and then I get my service editor dialog. Right, it's going to show up. And I have my different parameters. I could set mapping properties, instances, add a description, my lovely metadata, as you can tell. Ignore that. And like I said, I can analyze or hit publish, but we still analyze anyways, just so you know. But I want to analyze. Check my data for me, please. And the software, here's my error message check at the bottom here of ArcMap. Can you guys see that, right? I want to highlight warning number 2. Hey, this data is not in a data store. I'm going to copy the data because you didn't predefine for me a location of valid data for my web services, right? Okay, I don't care. So I'm going to hit publish anyways. Hey, again, we love you guys as customers. ArcMap is saying, hey, double warning here, dude. You want me to make a web service? Okay, but I can't see it. I'm going to copy it. Are you okay with it? Sure. So I'm just highlighting the fact that it's a really nice user experience. We warn you once, we warn you twice. Right? So we're just saying, okay, you know what? I don't know much about server. I don't care. I want to quit for the day. My boss told me to make my web service. Boom, I want to have it running. So we're doing that. We're copying the data to ArcGIS Server. It just happens to be on the same machine, but I want you guys to understand the concept. Okay? So I have now duplicated that file geodatabase twice on the same box, right? And this is why it's like, just crank it here. We're all done? Okay. Oops. I hit refresh on Server Manager. Here's my copied service. And if I click on it, I can go to what is it, parameters. Here is where my data is. It's in this folder here. I've copied it. And that's fine. Nothing. Life is good. If I had other people accessing the same data, then I'd copy it again and again and again. That's not a good best practice, obviously. It's going to bloat my server, right? Another drawback to this workflow is this. What if I updated my source data? Is that update, does it appear or get reflected in my web service? No. So that's not a good thing. Well, what's my other option? And this is by default. We want to make you feel good. We want to make you happy. Right? We can do this. We can, oh, by the way, we have an option to block this, because people complain about that too. So we have an option to block this if you want to disable this. If you block it, though, you have to do option number 2, which is I can reference the data. Same scenario, ArcMap, referencing my data. Now when I publish my web service, I tell ArcGIS Server, hey, go to the data store location. That source data is going to power the web service. Does that make sense? Right? So again, this is useful. I have to define a data store. This is that idea of a concept. Data is not copied. And the benefit is if I update my source data, it will be reflected in the web service the next time there's a request. Does that make sense? So let me go back to ArcMap. Whoops. I'm going to go to File, Share As again. This time I'll call this Reference. Root directory. I'll just do an analyze real quick. I get the same warning as before, but now I can do this. Expand the warning, right-click, register data source with server. So now I got the path location, and I'm going to call this data source 1. Okay? Before I do that, I'm going to show you something. Back in ArcGIS Server Manager, under the Site tab, here's my server directories, configuration store. All of these locations are very important, as I mentioned. We have data stores here. Notice I do not have one called Data Source 1. You guys see that, right? So there's no smoke and mirrors here, right? So I'm going to go back, hit OK. Now, behind the scenes, we're allowing the ArcGIS account to access that folder location, right? Hit Analyze. That copy warning should go away. The other ones are bad, but I'm not a cartographer. I hit Publish. No warning. Life is good, right? So if you're a server administrator, it might be a best practice for you to tell your end users, if you want to put something as a web service, dump it at some file share. Does that make sense? And you predefine that file share location as a valid data store, the concept for your server site. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes?
Quick clarification, you're not really giving ArcGIS Server access in the case of file-based shares. You're basically just telling ArcGIS Server it can access it, because previously you had to give your run-as account in TFS privilege on that directory.
Okay. Yes. You know, when I define that location, I've told ArcGIS Server, you can go here to get the data, and I have not explicitly given it permission. I've predefined on my machine the ArcGIS Server account as an admin account on everything. Yes.
I'm just saying the registration failed if the run-as account on, say, your shared directory doesn't have that file level access, directory level access.
Well, yes. I don't want to get everyone caught too much in the weeds, but yeah, you're right. Okay, here. Now when I go to Manager, notice if I refresh it, data stores, I have that new data store. Does that make sense? Yes?
If your data store is on another server, does that server have to have the same ArcGIS login and permissions granted?
If I have my data store on another server box, do I have to have another ArcGIS server login? The answer is maybe. It depends on if I've defined the login as a local account or a domain account. When you create it, you can specify one or the other. If it's a local, then I'd have to make another ArcGIS account there. I'm not 100%, so I want to punt that to the people in the expo, but I'm like 90% sure. Yes? If it's a domain account, can I have the data store on a file share? Sorry, I think that's the last bit.
On a file share?
Yes, you can have it on a file share. Sir?
Yeah, the option to block copying data, is that available on 10.24.1?
Yes, the option to block copy was added at like 10.2. Yes, it's definitely there.
That's on Server Manager?
Yes. Or I think it might be in the, I need to check the help, but I know it's there. I haven't done it in a while. All right. There's one more workflow that I want to cover. So we all understand the concept of a data store, right? I know we're going tight on time. My goodness. Okay. We have this third option, which is replace path. Here I have ArcMap accessing my data. Before I even publish the data, I copy the data. I, myself, physically copy the data onto another machine. When I publish my web service, at the time that I publish it, I define a data store that tells ArcGIS Server, when I publish this web service, you're going to find the data that powers this web service somewhere else. It's called replace path. And I might do this workflow if, let's say, for example, I have my server site in a DMZ. Right? So I don't want the server site to reference my original source data because it's behind my firewall, it's in some secured area. So with this workflow, we support that requirement that I can actually redirect my service to point to some other location of my source data. Of course, this requires additional data management, but it gives you more flexibility. And it also does not support data updates. Because right now I made a copy of the data. Does that make sense? How do I do that? Well, I can do it in ArcMap. Actually, what I'm going to do is this. Instead of going in ArcMap, I can go into ArcGIS Server Manager. I can click on my data source one, and I can hit Edit. Notice I have this option, same as publisher folder path. So when I publish my web service, go to that publisher folder path. I'm going to change this slightly now. I'm going to just open up Internet Explorer. Notice on my E drive, I have this folder called UC Demo Source 2 with the same geology data. Do you guys see that? I'm going to copy this location. I'll uncheck same as folder path and paste it in here and save it. Now I've altered my data store slightly, right? I've replaced the path. Does that make sense? So even though my map points to my data on my C drive, when I publish my web service, it's going to use the data on my E drive. All right? Hit save.
That's only for new things published, right?
Correct. It's only for new content. I cannot switch it for something that's already been published. Then go back to ArcMap, share as a service, publish, and I'll call this replace. Analyze, and no warning, no error message, right? And I hit publish.
Question,
Sorry.
When you do this, do you have to manually copy like that data from your E drive to the other location of the E drive, or is this process actually making a copy of that data?
Okay, so the question was, when I do this, do I have to manually copy the data? The answer is yes. It does not copy it for you at all. Yep. So now I have my services, and you can see them. We are good. My 3 different services, right? So I have copy, reference, and replace. And you might be wondering, well, can I see, what if someone published a service, they didn't name it with this name, how do I find out where that source data is? Well, we have this geodatabase icon. See this copy, this icon here? Boom, click on that. It tells me it was copied. Right? Or I can click on the reference, click on this, and it was referenced. And if I click on it, I get the path location. Same thing with my replaced. Okay, so these are some pretty cool things to be aware of. Is everyone okay with the idea of data stores, the concept? So I want to make sure, I got 15 minutes, I want to make sure I cover the rest of the content here. Good questions, okay. So, data store concept, I use it when at the time of publishing my data, right? 2 types, databases and folders. And obviously, even though I went through 3 examples, we promote the reference or replace path option. That's probably a best practice. Does that make sense? Okay, so we talked about this. Let's talk about the ArcGIS data store component. And as I mentioned, this is different. This is used when I want to deploy a web GIS. So here, you can see I have Portal for ArcGIS. The server site becomes a hosting server for Portal, and I'm going to discuss that tomorrow in the Portal session. And then I have the ArcGIS data store, that component on the bottom there. Separate software installation. Its only purpose in life for the ArcGIS data store is for it to store content generated in Portal. For example, if I was to take some data in ArcGIS Pro, and when Pro publishes to Portal for ArcGIS, that data might be copied into the ArcGIS data store. Or if a user is in Portal for ArcGIS, they run an analysis tool and they generate new data. That data is stored in the ArcGIS data store. Or if I want to publish 3D scene services from ArcGIS Pro, that data is copied into the ArcGIS data store. Another example might be if someone uses ArcGIS maps for Office, they geocode some points from a spreadsheet, they want to share that spreadsheet back to the portal, those points get copied into the ArcGIS data store. Now we have several different types of data stores, so when you go through the installation wizard, it will say to you, do you want it to be relational, which is the default? Do you want it to be tile cache for scene services, so 3D services, or do you want it to be spatial temporal to support big data? You can decide which of the 3 you want to install or enable, and you go through a whole wizard. And there's a whole other demo theater that talks about the best practices for the ArcGIS data store. Everyone understands now the difference between the data store concept and the ArcGIS data store, right? Good? All right. So let's go over some server security basics, right? As I mentioned, since 10.4, we've enabled it to be HTTP and HTTPS, designed to work with your enterprise systems. One option is this. You can also take your server site and federate it with Portal. What this means is you're telling ArcGIS Server to delegate its authentication and security model to Portal for ArcGIS. We'll talk about federation more in the Portal for ArcGIS session. Okay. Now, when I talk about security, I want to go over some key concepts before you leave. So there's this idea of authentication versus authorization. Authentication is the process of checking a login when they try to connect to the server site, right? And we support 2 types, web tier versus GIS tier authentication. And if you want to use web tier authentication, you have to install the ArcGIS web adapter. After they've gained access into the server site, we then have authorization. What can they do once they've logged in? Now in ArcGIS Server, we have a couple of concepts. A user is basically a valid login. We can collect them together into groups. And there are 3 different default groups: administrators, publishers, and users. And as you can tell, your permission levels increase as you go up the stack. Obviously, users can't do what admins do, right? Users consume the data, publishers can create new data, admins have full control of the server site. Now, all of this information, users and roles, are stored in this idea of an identity store, a location that basically defines all your users and roles. And ArcGIS Server supports 3 different types of identity stores. You can have the built-in identity store, which is the default option, not recommended for production. You can register your server site with an enterprise identity store. So if your organization has Windows Active Directory, you can tell ArcGIS Server to grab all its users and roles from Windows Active Directory. Or you might have a mixed mode where you define your users in the server site, but you grab your users from Windows Active Directory, but you define your own rules. So you have some control there. Yes? We support Active Directory and LDAP. I don't know the exact list, but it's in the help. But at a high level, we support Active Directory and LDAP. We can take that offline, sir. I don't know. But, yeah. So where is that? Actually, I can go in here in the Server Manager. I go to the Security tab. Notice I'm using the built-in, right? And I can define my users here and also my roles in Server Manager if I wanted to. Or if I want to, I can click this pencil and change the security. Again, built-in identity store, not a best practice. Talk to an enterprise identity store, or I have a mixed mode where I pull my users from the enterprise identity store but then define my own rules. Now, when I create new services, by default, they are public. So I want to control permissions for my services, right? The whole idea of ArcGIS Server was to share your content to a larger audience. That's why I made it public by default. But I can click on a service or a folder that contains services to change their security settings. Okay? So if I want to learn more about security, we have these two sessions here. And now that I look at it, the Tuesday ones are already done. I apologize. I didn't notice that till now. So you want to go on Thursday. All right? Take the picture. Okay. What else? Inside ArcGIS Server Manager, you can also have some metric reporting, right? I have this tool where I can click on my services and view how many requests are made for that service. So I can see which services are being used more or less, and also the response time. We also have logging in ArcGIS Server Manager for that rare occasion when something goes wrong, right? And you can go in and query the logs and see what happened. That's ArcGIS Server Manager. Let's look at the Server Administrator Directory. This is that other blue box, that other endpoint into your server site. As I mentioned, you don't want to run commands here, but you can see the URL if you want to write scripts. With the Server Administrator Directory, you can change the security setting of your server site. So you can make it HTTP or all HTTPS. Totally up to you, and you follow this path. Security config update. Another thing you can do as a best practice is you can also disable the services directory. This is that third blue box, that web page that lists all of your web services, right? You can actually hide this so nothing shows up. Maybe you don't want people browsing to access your services. This is also an option. How do I do that? Well, again, I go to the server administrator. I go to System, Handlers, REST, Service Directory, and I edit that checkbox called Services Directory Enabled. I uncheck it, and I hit Update, and it will camouflage or hide your services directory. Yes? The question was, can I make it available for internal but hide to the public? The answer is no. It's all or nothing. That doesn't, but if someone has like a URL for a service, or like a really specific one, and they click on it, they can still access it. It just hides the browsing option. So it's more like a camouflage. So it's not a security, it's not a guarantee, it's a best practice, but not a security block. I want to be clear on that. Okay? Yes?
If you're logged in, can you still see all those services? Do you log in to the admin?
Right, if you're logged in, then you can see it. That's a good question, and I'm not sure. I need to double check that.
Different site. Services site is hidden, but this is the admin directory.
This screenshot here is the admin directory that you have to log in to access. I believe what the gentleman was asking is, if I've hidden it, and let's say I'm in the same web browser, and I've logged in as an admin, can I see it? I'm pretty sure it's hidden, but I need to double check. Okay. All right, I know it's getting late. I apologize. I have like maybe 5 more slides. Command line utilities. These are tools that are built into the installation directory of ArcGIS Server. Right? I want to highlight 2 of them for you. You may want to run these scripts. Okay? One is you can run a script called serverscan.py, which basically checks if your server site has followed all the best practices for security. That's not to say it's always true. That's not to say your site is invulnerable. We just have some best practices. And we actually have a help doc on this. Oops. Okay, so it tells you all the errors. So if I want to access it, I simply go to my server installation directory. So I go to C, Program Files, ArcGIS, Server, Tools, Admin. Here are all the different scripts. And I can run my server scan scripts. Let me just copy this. And I'll do CD, whoops, paste. Then I can say server scan.py, enter in my machine name, my admin name, my super secret password. I'm sure you can guess what it is. And then where do I want to put this server scan? I'll put it on ctemp, and it runs. Okay. I have 14 security holes that have violated best practices. Right. I navigate to ctemp. I get that report, and I can open it. And here there's different code values in my report. I would check those against my help topic here. Okay? Does that make sense? There's an equivalent one for Portal for ArcGIS. So just FYI on that. Another useful script, and I don't have time to demo it, is backup and restore for your server site. Very, very useful. Okay, so you may want to set up a Python script to run every week or something to back up and restore your server site, your configuration, store, and your server directories. FYI, we also have this patch and update app, right? So if I go to the server program group, this checks for you live if there's been any patches released for that release. Okay, so something to be aware of. And then finally, upgrading, right? What the team has done a phenomenal job is you can actually upgrade from any one of these releases directly to 10.5.1. That may be changing in the future. But you don't have to go from 10.2 to 10.2.1 to 10.3, blah, blah, blah. You can go straight from one of these to 10.5.1. Yes? I don't know. I don't know. That I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know because the extension model has changed. I would check with the extension team. I can't answer that. Okay. So 5 high-level tips when I'm upgrading, right? Use the same PSA account, right? Uninstall and reinstall the web adapter. If my server site is federated with Portal, don't unfederate. And if I've deployed the web GIS, I want to upgrade my server site before I upgrade the data store. Okay. For more information, right? Enterprise security. If you want to learn more about Portal for ArcGIS, I'm giving a session tomorrow at 10:15. I know we covered a lot. I apologize. I give fair warning, right? There's lots of content here. We talked about the ArcGIS server component. We talked about its architecture. We talked about the ArcGIS web adapter component, single versus multi-machine deployments. I gave you a tour of ArcGIS Server Manager. You understand the difference between the data store concept versus the ArcGIS data store. And we went over some best practices and highlights of the server administrator directory and the command line utilities, and also upgrade. Thank you guys very much. Please fill out the survey, and if you have questions, we'll take questions, okay? But I'm going to unpack. So thank you guys. Enjoy your afternoon. Yes?
The previous slide you said Pro does not directly publish the server. Does it indirectly publish the server?
Under the hood, yes. The question was, does ArcGIS Pro publish the server? Indirectly, yes. But you have to connect to a portal. Like mechanically, it does, I guess, is a better way to say it.
But it can't connect directly to an ArcGIS server. You have to...
Correct. The question was, can ArcGIS Pro connect just to an ArcGIS server site and publish? The answer is no. It's got to connect through a portal because it's been designed to create things like feature layers, the item, content in portal. That's why. No problem. Card, yes. Okay, sorry. Yes, sir.
Are R-locks still an issue with the multiple machine files there?
The question is, are R-locks still an issue for multi-machine deployment? I don't know, sir. You're going to have to go down to the expo. I can't answer that. Yes?
You had said something earlier in the presentation about like clusters. You said like when you publish services to a cluster, it's actually like duplicating those on each machine?
No, what I said was, sir, if I have a multi-machine, if I have a multi-machine deployment of ArcGIS server, and I add more instances to my web service, right? Let's say I have 3 machines here, and it's one server site, that web service actually lives on every single machine. So when I bump it up to 3, it bumps up to 3 on machine 1, machine 2, and machine 3. That's what I meant to say.
Okay.
And I didn't use the word cluster. That word cluster is being deprecated. That's why.
Right.
I was very explicit about that.
And we've got clusters now, which is why I'm kind of wondering.
You should talk to, if it's working for you and it's great, life is good,
Does it work when you have 2 if you throw 3 at it? Seems to
I would go downstairs and talk to professional services or find someone at the Enterprise Island.